Hi, gang. Let's see if we can't talk about our mood disorders chapter. Everybody has moods, everybody has uh, emotions. Now, one thing I want to make clear is emotions are not right or wrong, it's what you do with them. But when an emotion grossly deviates and like you have prolonged sadness that starts interfering with day-to-day living, then we start talking about a mood disorder. Okay, mood disorders, there's different types of mood episodes. These are periods of either a depressed mood or an elevated mood that lasts for days, weeks, longer. Now, what we're going to be talking about is depression and the bipolar moods or bipolar disorder. And when we're talking about a major depressive disorder, uh, there's a couple of new additions to the DSM-5. One, we did not used to have the premenstrual dysphoric disorder, nor did we have the disruptive mood dysregulation disorder in the DSM-4 or earlier. Now, uh, there are three types of bipolar disorders. Most people just think that bipolar disorder is just manic depression, that you're either very, very manic, where you have a hyper excitatory type of mood, where you're exaggeratedly happy, or you're exaggeratedly manic, where you have too much energy, you may not be able to sleep, you can be very, very irritable, uh, just a very, very swing to the manic part, or you could swing to the depressive part, and that's all. Now, manic depressive is now called bipolar disorder, and there, instead of just one type of disorder, bipolar is divided into three. Now, the DSM-5 criteria for major depressive disorder or major depressive episode, again, its features of a major depressive episode include the following that occurs most of the day, nearly every day, for at least 2 weeks: a depressed mood, a marked diminished interest or pleasure in most daily activities, anhedonia, significant weight loss when not dieting, or a weight gain, or a significant decrease or increase in appetite, insomnia or hypersomnia, a noticeable psychomotor agitation or retardation, fatigue, loss of energy, feeling of worthlessness, or maybe even excessive guilt, diminished ability to think, concentrate, make decisions, recurrent thoughts of death, suicide, suicidal attempts, clinically significant distress, impairment. And these symptoms are not due to either substance abuse or another general medical condition. Now, I'm going to go ahead and roll through these slides and then roll through another set of slides that I've got. So we're going to go ahead and move on to bipolar, or I'm sorry, to manic. Now, manic is a distinct period of abnormally or persistent elevated, expansive, or irritable mood lasting at least 1 week. Significant degree in at least three of the following: inflated self-esteem, decreased need for sleep, or an excessive talkativeness, racing thoughts, distractibility, increased goal-directed activity or psychomotor agitation, excessive involvement in high-risk behaviors. Now, I'm kind of running through these right now because on the second set of slides, I'm going to talk a little bit more. Mood disturbance and severe enough to cause impairment in normal functioning, might even require hospitalization. Bipolar or manic episode can get to the point that it can actually exhibit psychotic features. This can be delusions. And another thing is, as a person has less and less sleep, just a second, let me organize this. Oops, technical difficulties. There we go. As a person has less and less sleep, not only do they become more and more irritable and less able to focus on things, but they also can develop a psychosis. Now, if you go a full week or longer without any sleep whatsoever, you can develop psychotic psychotic features. You can start having, a break with reality, delusions, hallucinations. So, when I hear somebody tell me, well, I don't ever dream. Well, yeah, you do. Because when we dream in REM. And if REM is interrupted for longer than a week or so, you can start becoming psychotic. Okay? Symptoms, these are not going to be caused by the, let me see here, I'm sorry. I've got technical difficulties here. There we go. Symptoms that are not caused by the direct physiological effects of a substance or medical condition. So we know that these manic episodes are not caused because somebody's on speed. Somebody's not on amphetamines, okay? All right. The type of mood episodes. Well, major depressive episode. This is when a person has an extremely depressed mood and they are not able to experience pleasure. Now, this inability to experience pleasure is called anhedonia. Now, this will last most of the day, nearly every day, for at least 2 weeks. There will be at least 4 physical or cognitive symptoms along with it, such as not being able to make a decision, feeling worthless, fatigue, having an appetite change, restlessness, feeling slowed down, either sleeping too much or not sleeping enough. Now, in a manic episode, they're going to have an expansive mood. You get somebody, I've had people that come in that are on a manic episode, and there are 2 types. There's hypermanic and hypomanic. And when they come in, they'll be starting to chatter as fast as they can, and it's hard to keep up with them. They can have a flight of ideas, and we've talked about what a flight of ideas can be composed of. They can have racing thoughts. They are easily distracted. They will have an increase in goal-directed activities. Okay. Okay. Now, hypomanic episode, these are shorter, less severe episodes of mania. Okay. They last at least 4 days. They will be fewer. There will be milder symptoms. There will be less impairment. And they may not be as problematic in of itself, but usually these are going to occur in context of a more problematic mood disorder or disturbance. Okay. Now, mixed features, this means that it's a mood episode with some elements reflecting the opposite valence of mood. For example, this is going to be a person that has some depressed episode with some manic features, or a manic episode with some depressed features. Now, one of the things that one of the psychiatrists told me is, we always talk about when we want to medicate somebody who's manic, we want to bring them down where they'll just have basically, instead of real highs and real lows, we want them to have just a stable, kind of like a straight line uh, type of mood. And that's not right. That's not correct. According to the psychiatrist, we want them to have that wave like motion, but we don't want them to be a severe high and then a real severe drop low. We want them to be, a very easygoing kind of riding the wave, and that there's not extremes. Manic depressive disorder. Well, before we get into this, let me tell you, depression is one of the, it's a really, really hard one to diagnose sometimes. You can have somebody come in and say, Doc, I am so sad and I want to sleep all the time. I don't have much of an appetite and I'm just not interested in that much. Well, the doctor says, that sounds like you're depressed. Let's give you an antidepressant. Well, the next guy comes in and says, Doc, I am so irritable lately and I can't sleep and I just want to eat all the time. And they go on. And he'll say, oh, well, you're depressed. And the two are friends. And one of them says, well, doctor said I was depressed. He said, well, I was too. We're not anything alike. No, but that's why sometimes depression is hard to diagnose. And sometimes the patient doesn't understand when they do get a diagnosis of depression that it's an on-target diagnosis. Well, clinical features. One or more of the depressive episodes are going to be separated by remission. Now, when you have the first episode of depression, it's called the single episode, it's highly unusual once a person has one episode of depression that's all they'll ever have. Normally, once you have an episode of major depression, it's going to recur. And once it gets so severe that a doctor decides that the best course of treatment is going to be the electroconvulsive therapy, that'll be a series of treatments over several weeks. And the sad thing is, once a person has had these ECTs, the chances are, and the odds say, it's going to have to happen again in the future. Now, a friend of mine that was a therapist, that is a therapist in Memphis, once told me that 90% of the people that she treats, even when they come in and say, well, they're depressed or whatever, anxious and such as that, she said 90% of them really end up being unresolved grief. I believe this, and I've seen a lot of it myself. Everybody grieves, and everybody have grief episodes, but what you do with the grief is going to determine what your course of emotions are going to be in the future. If a person stuffs that grief, if a person denies that grief is not going to go away. It has to be resolved. And for the many, many, many times I've seen unresolved grief actually be the core of the problem for depression. Previously, depression couldn't be diagnosed during periods of mourning because the grief can be so pronounced. We now recognize that major depression may occur as part of the grieving process. Some people grieve deeper than others, more pronounced than others. more prolonged than others. And I know that when I was young, many times I heard people say, well, okay, the person died 2 weeks ago. They need to get over it and move on. Every person's different. Every person, they don't grieve at the same way, at the same time, at the same depth than any other person. And so I'm going to do a lecture on grief following this one, but we'll talk about that more then. To have a persistent depressive disorder, the person has to have at least 2 years of depressive symptoms. They have to have depression that has lasted a good time, a good long time, more than 2 years. They have to be depressed most of the day. They have to be depressed most of the day on more than 50% of the days. Out of 12 months, they cannot be symptom-free more than 2 months. The symptoms can persist unchanged for over long periods of time, even greater than 20 years. Symptoms may include periods of more severe major depressive symptoms. These major depressive symptoms may be intermittent, or they may last for the majority or the entirety of the time period. Now, just because a person smiles does not mean they're not depressed. There's an old song, The Tears of a Clown. And true statement, a lot of times people hide their depression and they put on a good act, and yet they're really, really sobbing inside. And so we need to be aware of that. There are types of persistent depressive disorder, such as mild depressive symptoms without any major depressive episodes. These are what we call pure dysthymic syndrome. Major depressive symptoms with additional major depressive episodes called double depression. And major depressive